After riding the Polygon Collosus N9 for over a year, it's finally time to give you a long-term review on this full suspension mountain bike. So I got my list to keep me on track. We're covering everything from design and build quality, ride and comfort, performance, components. I'll talk about the stock components versus what I upgraded on this bike. Of course, I'm gonna go over the durability and reliability of this bike after riding it for a year. And then we'll finish the video off talking about the value for the money, the pros and the cons. And by the end of this video, you'll know everything you need to know about the Polygon Collosus N9. Disclaimer, this bike was sent to me from Bikes Online, but they're not paying me to say any of this stuff, so you can expect an honest, long-term review from an average rider just like you. Now, before we dive into the list, let's just give a brief overview of this mountain bike. The Polygon Collosus N9 is a long travel, full suspension mountain bike. It's got 170 millimeters of rear and front suspension travel, comes with big 29-inch wheels, and it falls into the Enduro bike category, which, if you're not familiar, Enduro bike is designed around Enduro World Cup racing, which means it has to handle long, grueling climbs to the top, so it's got to be good at climbing. But it's really got to be good at smashing back downhill as fast as you possibly can. Now, first topic on the list, I want to start with the overall design and build quality of this bike. So it's an aluminum frame on this bike. It comes in that green color, kind of a green holographic color, which means it's got kind of like that oil slick or rainbow kind of tint to it as you tilt it side to side. It's got the holographic chrome decals that also have that kind of oil slick tint to them. And you can see the way I've upgraded this bike kind of brings out or accents those colors even more with like the oil slick pedals and some of the chrome accents that I'll cover just a little bit later when I talk about how I upgraded this ride. And since they designed this bike for those Enduro style rides, it's got that nice slack, long and low modern geometry. So it's got a 63.5 degree head tube angle, nice steep 77 degree seat tube angle, overall 500 mil reach for this size extra large, short 435 mil chain stays. It's got a nice low standover, so the bike's super easy to kind of ditch and get out of your way if you have to hop off of it. And a nice tall stack, which means those bars are kind of up in a comfortable position geared towards those downhill runs. But one of the first things people usually notice about this bike is the suspension design with that IFS or independent floating suspension 6-bar linkage. With this 6-bar linkage, that means that usually here in the back, you'll have a single pivot where the chainstay just connects to the frame right here and pivots up, and then you'll have a single rocker link here up top. But with this bike, there's 2 additional pivots down here in the bottom, 2 additional like rocker link sections right here on the top and one down there on the bottom, which really allows them to specifically kind of tune the overall kinematics of this suspension, which means that they can change the leverage ratio on this bike. So they can keep it to where when you're pedaling uphill, it's not going to give you that bob. Yet when you're smashing back downhill, it's still going to allow that full fluid 170 millimeters of rear suspension travel. So definitely a unique suspension design, and I think it kind of looks cool too, especially on a big, beefy enduro bike like this. Now overall, like looking at the bike, just the design quality, looking at the welds with this being an aluminum frame, really clean welds on here, really clean looking design, and overall I was impressed when I pulled this thing out of the box, especially with it being a budget, or lower cost enduro mountain bike. Now next up on the list, we're going to get to the comfort and the ride quality. As you get on this bike and you start pedaling it, the first thing you notice is just how well this bike pedals. I mean, for having 170 millimeters of rear suspension travel, you'd expect quite a bit of pedal bob, which is like when you're really cranking on those pedals, the bike's gonna start to bob up and down. But that is not the case with this 6-bar suspension. The bike feels so comfortable climbing on the way uphill. Got that nice steep 77 degree seat tube angle. The The slacker 63.5-degree head tube angle, when I first got this bike, I thought it was going to be too slack, especially around some of those tight switchbacks. But I think because it's got the shorter chain stays, I don't know, there's something they do when they design a bike to where when they kind of get all those numbers just right, that makes a bike just ride so comfortable and feel so good on the trail. And that's exactly what you get with the Polygon Collosus N9. You get a bike that's super comfortable, super efficient to climb on the way up, and feels so stable smashing on the way back downhill. So for the overall comfort and ride quality on this bike, I'm really impressed with what they've done with the Polygon N9. The only downside I have, I'll get to a little bit later when I talk about the cons of this bike. Next up on the list is the overall performance of this bike, which I already started to touch on just a little bit right there. Great at climbing on the way uphill, super efficient pedaler, makes this bike accelerate right off the line, but when you're smashing back downhill, that's really where this bike comes alive. They spec this thing with a Fox 38 performance fork up front, so nice, big, beefy 38 mil stanchions. It's a performance model, so it's only got the grip damper. It doesn't have the fancier grip 2 damper, but I've found that this fork feels so good on this bike. Through the chunk, this bike just plows and eats up all the chunk with that beefy suspension and 170 millimeters of front and rear travel. When it comes to more technical sections of the trail where you have to, whip this bike around corners, it's got the shorter chain stays on there, which makes this bike kind of feel nimble and quick to snap around the corners. The stock wheels and tires on this bike do hold it back, and that segues kind of perfectly into my next section, which is stock components versus the upgrades I did to this bike. So stock parts that come in this bike. This bike comes spec'd really good out of the box. I already talked a little bit about the suspension with the Fox 38 fork up front, X2 shock in the rear. It actually comes with this mudguard right here. It comes with a full XT build, so it's got, full XT cranks, XT derailleur, XT shifter. Does have a Dior cassette that comes stock on it, but I upgraded the cassette on this bike mainly to save weight. But overall, the stock components on this bike, it really comes ready to shred right out of the box, and you don't have to upgrade anything unless you're trying to get optimal performance out of this bike, which brings me to my very first upgrade that I recommend for the Polygon Collosus N9, which is upgrading the wheels and the tires on this bike. You see, these are the Entity double wall aluminum rims that come, with, first of all, center lock rotors that I'm not a huge fan of, but that's being kind of picky. But they come with these beefy 2.6-inch Magic Mary tires, and they have tubes in them, even though they're pretty easy to convert to tubeless. And the problem with these wheels is, one, they're heavy. They're very heavy. These stock wheels are coming in with a total combined weight of 14 pounds, 7 ounces, or 6.5 kilograms. Damn, that's a heavy wheel. Two, with these Magic Mary super gravity tires, the tires are heavy, the tubes are heavy as well, also adding to the weight, and massive amount of grips with 2.6-inch tires that come on this bike, stock, front, and rear. Makes this bike feel slow due to the overall rolling weight and resistance you get with this stock setup right out of the box. And when I initially weighed this bike, like I said, it weighed in at over 41 pounds. 41 pounds, 12 ounces. Let's get it for our non-American folks. 18.79. So definitely pretty heavy bike. So what I did to remedy that problem, I think I took it a little bit too far with this first upgrade, because I got the i9 EN300, still an aluminum wheel set, but a lighter, much lighter weight aluminum wheel set. Comes with these big, beefy aluminum spokes, chrome accents, which looked really good with that Polygon kind of logo right there. I had the Pirelli Scorpion tires on here set up tubeless, so a lighter weight tire, nice grippy tire up front with a 2.5 inch tire up front, had a faster rolling 2.4 inch tire in the rear. And after just doing this wheel upgrade, it cut the bike's weight by like over 4 pounds, which is crazy. 10 pounds, 10 ounces, or 4.77 kilograms. Damn, so that's like 4 pounds difference between these two wheel sets. But I will admit that these Industry 9 wheels were a bit much on this bike. So going back and forth, if you guys have been following my videos, I got the Industry 9 wheels. Those things were like over $1,600. And right now I have this bike set up with a much more budget-friendly, yet still high-performance set of Hunt Enduro Wide V2 wheels. I do have this bike set up in a mullet configuration right now, which, you know, check out the video if you guys haven't seen that mullet setup on the Polygon N9 yet. Business up front, party in the back. Get it? And I'm still going back and forth on whether I'm gonna keep this bike in the mullet setup or convert it back to full 29er. But either way, I'm probably ditching the expensive i9 wheels. I'm probably gonna sell those because I'm really loving the Hunt wheels, and I think they offer the best bang for your buck when it comes to a wheel upgrade. Now, other things I upgraded on this bike was the bars and the stem on this bike. This bike came with a much longer 50 mil stem. It's got that race face effect stem. Just a little bit too long for me for an enduro bike. I kind of like a shorter stem, just like the way it feels in the steering and kind of the handling. So ditched the 50 mil stem. I like the way that 35 mil Trail 1 stem feels much better. Also ditched the race face bars. These are a set of aluminum bars. The bars that I have on there right now are carbon bars. I went back and forth, did some carbon versus aluminum bar testing, and I've really just found that when you have like beefier suspension like this, I like the way the carbon bars feel. They're a little bit stiffer, and since you have so much suspension, I feel like it kind of helps you like push into that suspension a little bit better. I don't know, maybe that's a placebo effect, but stuck with the carbon Trail 1 bars on here. If you guys want to check out these Trail 1 bars or this bike, I got links in the video description. I always try and throw discount codes. I got a discount code for Trail 1, don't have a discount code for Polygon, but definitely check the links as I'm talking through this stuff. I got links for the Hunt wheels as well. Sorry, just short little plug to support my channel, but this video is more about telling you guys about the long term on the N9. So let's get back into the upgrades I did. One upgrade that I'd say you guys definitely have to do to your bike when you get it is getting rid of this dropper post lever right here. The dropper post lever that comes on these bikes, just cheap, doesn't action very well. It's basically, it's just stretching the cable right here and just pinching it. It doesn't have, you know, it's got a small little roller on it right there, but I swapped that out for the Wolf Tooth Pro remote, and you can see just how much bigger the circumference is on that kind of roller wheel that it flexes the cable around. It made that dropper action a little bit quicker, definitely made it easier to kind of press in with my thumb and get that seat post up when I wanted it and back down out of the way when I didn't. Now also on the cockpit, the grips, I swapped out the stock Entity grips. There's nothing wrong with these grips right here. You can see it's got the ribbing right there in the front. It's got the you know, the grip for your fingers on the bottom down there. Kind of thin, I guess. They're not the thickest grips. And my very favorite set of grips are the Trail 1 Hell's Gate grips that I have on this bike right now. Love those grips. Definitely recommend you guys check those out. Now another thing I upgraded on this bike was the saddle, the stock saddle that comes on this bike. I get it, it's a more gravity focused downhill bike, but you also got to be able to climb up to the top of those downhill runs. And the stock saddle, first of all, it's kind of slippery, so your ass is kind of sliding off the end just a little bit as you're climbing uphill. Second of all, it's just uncomfortable, not very good padding on that saddle right there, or not enough of it at least. So I swapped out the saddle, went with the Ergon saddle that I really like the way that saddle feels. Plus, It's got the oil slick rails on there, which kind of goes with those oil slick pedals I got on there. This bike does come with pedals when you get it out of the box. They're these cheap kind of, I think I got rid of them, these cheap aluminum pedals. They will work. You can ride with the pedals that come on this bike. However, I went with the 1UP oil slick alloy pedals, matching those oil slick rails and that kind of overall kind of oil slick tint on this bike, which I think looked amazing. Yes, I could have gone with composite, cheaper pedals, but I paid a little bit more for the looks. And sometimes, you know, I get it, you spend too much upgrading your bike, but sometimes it's those little things and those little upgrades that just make you really fall in love with your bike and love riding it. But now we need to talk about the most ridiculous upgrade I did to this bike, and I regret spending this much money, you guys. I got the 5 dev cranks, which just a ridiculous amount of money for that crank set. Plus, aftermarket cranks means I had to upgrade the bottom bracket. This bike already came with XT level group set, so XT cranks on here. However, they're 175 mil cranks, which is just way too long, especially when you're pedaling up through technical sections. Like, too long of a crank. Yes, it gives you good leverage. It makes it easier to spin on those fire road climbs. But when you get into technical sections, where I live, there's a lot of rocky technical sections. The 175 mil cranks were too long, so I wanted to go with a 165 mil crank. And I got a little bit carried away when looking online. I saw these, you know, chrome looking, or actually they're kind of like a raw alloy 5 dev cranks. Man, I got sold for sure. I knew they'd look great on this bike. They do look great on this bike, but spent way too much upgrading the cranks on this bike. If I had to do it all over again, I probably just would have found a set of cranks, like something from Race Face, that fit on the current bottom bracket I have on my bike, and I could have done like just a crank upgrade to get 165 mil cranks and probably spent a fraction of the cost. Now for the rear cassette on this bike, like I said, it came with a Dior level cassette, so not a big deal. That cassette performs fine, but I upgraded the rear cassette to this Garbarute cassette. I like it because it's a solid one piece, so you don't have a bunch of individual little chain rings that you kind of have to put on to piece it back together. It comes right off, pops right back on, super easy. Plus, it cut the weight of the rear wheel on this bike. There's a lot of people out there that'll tell you, weight doesn't matter, just ride your bike how it comes because it's all about getting out there and having fun. I agree. There's people on the other end of the spectrum that are trying to cut every gram off of their bike that we call weight weenies. That may be a little bit extreme, but somewhere in the middle, you have to look at the heavy components on your bike, especially when it comes to things like the wheels and the tires. That rolling, unsprung, and rotational weight makes a huge difference on the way your bike performs. So I definitely recommend doing some of the upgrades, but not all the upgrades I did to my Polygon Collosus N9. So if I had to do it all over, what would I upgrade and why? Honestly, I think if I had to do it all over and I was trying to do it the most cost-effective way, I would keep the bike pretty much how it comes right out of the box, except for I would get a set of Hunt Enduro wide wheels. I would then mount those Hunt Enduro wide wheels with the Schwalbe Magic Mary tires that come on this bike and just run them tubeless. And I would probably just ride the bike like that. Oh, maybe upgrade that dropper post lever, just because the dropper post lever doesn't function very well. And for, you know, with the Hunt wheels costing about 500 dropper post lever, maybe I'm spending another 40, 50 bucks. For under 550 bucks, I could have made this bike perform as good as I needed it and just rode it that way and had a ton of fun riding this bike. But enough of the upgrades. Let's now get into kind of the meat of this review, which is the overall durability and reliability of this bike. Aluminum bike. From Polygon, direct to consumer, more budget bike that people say, oh, do you worry about that bike cracking versus a Trek? Have you had any issues? Have you had any cracks? Big, beefy, you know, 6-bar suspension with all of those pivot points, all those different bearings. Have you had any issues with that? Have you crashed on this bike? How is it held up? You guys, I have been pushing this bike to the limits. I've crashed quite a few times on some gnarly black diamond style runs with rocks and roots everywhere. The derailleur is a bit scratched up right here. You can kind of see marks along the seat stays right here, marks down along the chain stays where I've crashed numerous times. I got, this spot on the down tube right here that I've kind of filled in with some paint because I hit really hard and kind of chipped through the paint into the aluminum down below. But overall, this bike held up great. I've been inspecting it, taking off that rear wheel, looking around the chain stays, looking around the pivot points, looking at the seat stays and everything, looking for any kind of cracks or signs of significant damage. I can find none. I've taken this bike apart. I bought a bearing kit for this bike because I figured, maybe I should replace the bearings before they go bad. But talking to the guys at my local bike shop, they said usually if you do an inspection on the bearings and they're all rotating good, nice, smooth, and free, you don't need to replace them, just kind of inspect them every once in a while. Inspecting the bearings on this bike, everything is running smooth. I've had no issues with the overall durability and reliability of this bike. Even that Fox X2 rear shock that people have issues with, I've had no problems with that as well. I will admit one thing and be kind of honest with you guys. I've had this bike for over a year, but I do have a YouTube channel, which means I get a lot of other bikes to ride and review. So the amount of miles I've put on this bike over a year may not be as many miles as you would. So maybe this is, the amount of miles I've put on this bike is closer to like 6 or 8 months versus a year. But I've definitely rode this bike hard, pushed it to the limits, and I have no issues with the overall reliability and durability of this bike. On to page 2. All right, value for the money. So this bike right now, this Polygon Collosus N9 is on sale. It's usually about $3,500. It's on sale right now. Link in the description, like I said, if you want to help support the channel, for $26.99. Now, there are other Enduro bikes out there you can find that are around this price. Like if you look at Canyon, which is another, Canyon's another direct to consumer, ship the bike straight to you company. You can find their Enduro bike for about $28.99 on sale. That bike does come with like similar level, like spec components of this. So there's definitely some comparable bikes you can get for the same price range as the Polygon. But if you compare this bike to higher ends like the Specialized Enduro or the Trek Slash, things like that, or even like a Santa Cruz, this bike definitely gives you a lot more value for your money. The parts spec that come on it, like I said, the only thing I would even have to or even want to upgrade is maybe the wheels, but you could do that later. For the price, the value for this money, this bike really beats, most of the other companies out there, if not all of them, right out of the box, which is why I love recommending Polygon bikes to people, especially people who are just getting into, trying to buy their first full suspension mountain bike or buy their first Enduro bike. Polygon definitely offers you, I think, the best value for the money. But now, it's time to cover the big one on this list. The pros and the cons of the Polygon Collosus N9. Because I gotta be real with you guys, there's some downsides to this bike, one of which I already covered just a little bit earlier. But let's start with the strengths. Let's start with like some of the pros of this bike. So great value for the money, great overall parts specification, great ride quality. This bike rides amazing. Overall, good durability and performance from me after putting this bike through the ringer for over a year. And it's direct to consumer brand, which means you can order it directly from the comfort of your own home and have it sent directly to you. Plus, Bikes Online has amazing customer support and they're really easy to work with. And for those of you that are worried about maintaining your own bike, don't worry, you can bring this down to your local bike shop. They will work on bikes that are from direct to consumer brands. However, there are some cons or some downsides to buying this Polygon Collosus N9 and not buying one of those bikes from your local bike shop. First of all is the parts that come on this bike. The bearings, the bearing kit, when you do replace those bearings as they start to wear out, which all bikes will eventually, you have to order those from Bikes Online. And in my experience, when I ordered those bearings, it did take about a week. I think it was like 7 or 8 days it took for those bearings to actually be shipped to me. So it can take a little bit of time for you to get the parts, versus if you got this bike from your local bike shop, like something like a Trek, you can go down there, they may be able to have those bearings even quicker, or have a set on hand to be able to swap things like that out. Also, another con on this bike is that the derailleur hanger on this bike is not a universal derailleur hanger. It's not a UDH, which not having a universal derailleur hanger also means that you're gonna have to order that part specifically from Polygon if you happen to snap that derailleur hanger, once again, meaning it's gonna take a little bit longer for you to get your bike repaired and fixed. Another definite con that I already talked about on this bike is just those heavy wheels and tires that come spec'd on it. I get it, you can still ride the bike with these wheels. Still has, decent engagement on that hub. Still has, comes with the super gravity, heavier casing tires, so the tires are definitely gonna handle the abuse. But the overall weight of these tires definitely holds this bike back. And if I could recommend anything to Polygon moving forward, is if you can just spec your bikes with a little bit lighter wheels, it'll really make these bikes stand out from the pack. Other cons on this bike is the fact that it's coming with 175 mil cranks. Now that's not unheard of. A lot of companies spec their bikes this way, but it's just a con. The 175 mil cranks I felt were way too long. Other components like the cheaper dropper post lever, definitely things that you're gonna want to look into changing out and upgrading over time. And those are some things that I put down on my list of cons for the Polygon Collosus N9. And the last con on the list of the Polygon Collosus N9, even though I haven't had issues with it, is this X2 rear shock. It's not easy to service. You have to actually send it off to Fox. Even your local bike shop can't tear this apart and service it for you, which you need to service it annually or so. So I'm coming up on the time when I'm gonna have to deal with that. It's had warranty issues, which a lot of people have been ditching the X2 rear shock. I haven't had any issues with it. I haven't had to file a warranty claim, but you got to list it on the cons for the rear shock, because a lot of people say that's a shock that they don't want on their bike. So after owning the Polygon Collosus N9 for over a year, riding it, really pushing it to its limits, I can confidently say this bike offers an amazing value for the price. No, it's not perfect, but for the price you're paying, you're getting an amazing machine that can handle anything you throw at it. So if you're in the market for a long travel, full suspension mountain bike, the Collosus N9 is definitely worth checking out. Like I said, I got links down there in the video description, but this video isn't about trying to sell you on buying this bike. It's just an honest, long-term review from an average rider like you. Remember, at the end of the day, it's all about getting stoked, going riding, and having some fun, people.